challenges?
What gives me hope are the people on the ground that are doing the work. As I've traveled over the past 4 or 5 years, all around our country, everywhere I've gone, I've visited people and been able to stay with people and eat in their homes and check out their systems, whether it's an agricultural system or some technological system or some business they're running or just a beautiful homestead. Um, Seeing people that are actively working towards the change to create the systems that are necessary for us to flourish in ways that we haven't seen. Um, that's what gives me hope. That's what I'm looking forward to um, as we move forward here.
Yeah. So it's really beautiful because I feel like both of you are helping people around the world to take action in this transformational time. Do you guys see this as an opportunity for a reboot?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think. I mean, it was only a matter of time. I've been thinking for since I was probably like 16 or 17 years old that this was all going to happen at some point. Um, I thought it was going to happen in like 10 years ago, 8 years ago. And then as more and more started happening with the uh, ecosystems, our ecology, as more and more started happening in the political terrain, and more and more started happening with human health in general on a broad scale, um, I was like, all right, we're gonna reach a tipping point here soon. That like we're gonna reach a point where um, there is no other choice, there is no other decision but to do the things that work. Because
Mhm.
humans are so good at doing things exactly the opposite way, you know.
Mhm.
Um,
Well, for me, William, it was like 50 years ago.
yeah,
I was there for the Earth Day, march and the movements for women, people of color, and yeah, we are at that point where it feels like Mother Nature put the brakes on. If you're not going to do it, I'm going to do it. Because anytime in nature, when a species kind of overrides the ability of the ecosystem to support it, it will step up and create balance.
Yeah.
That happens all the time. It's just a biological fact of science, and we've been stressing the immune system seriously for a long time. And there seems to be a cause and effect that's happening right now.
Yeah,
But
I was fortunate enough to have a conversation with Judith LeBlanc from Native Organizers Alliance. We did like a talk to a bunch of colleagues of ours about climate and indigeneity. And it was really an incredible conversation. One, because she set people straight that like indigeneity is not about a group, it's about your relationship to the land. And everybody is indigenous to somewhere. So like take off all the formality around how you feel about that and just orient yourself to the place where you are because it'll probably make your life easier. But in talking about that, we talked about climate change as to checks and balances. Like it's proof that the things we built are a part of a much bigger system that we did not build. And if you're feeling sick, if you're feeling exhausted, if you're feeling overexerted, it's because you've done all of those things to the environment around you. And so we're all getting checked. The question is, are we willing to get balanced, or will we override the system and a redesign will come whether we want it or we don't? So I do think that like for folks who have been stewarding the land everywhere they've been forever, this is not new information, but we feel very powerful as we build a thing inside a thing about what we built. So we build a political system, we build a system of capital. We think that that's the only market that exists, and we're wrong. Like all of this is biomimicry. All of us, all of it is us trying to figure out how to reconnect to the bigger thing that makes things more dynamic and multiplies them. And so when the experiments that we've made become so sacrosanct that they force us to be extractive, we lose people.
yeah, well, and
Suck all the nutrients out of soil. We make it so
yeah,
that people cannot drink water when it's the only thing they actually need. So I think we have far overextended. And the fact that in our, scientific discussions, it is our sense that we have until 2030 to get it right. There's so much hubris in that. That is a set of conversations we're having based on indicators in our own feedback loop in a really small part of the bigger conversation. So, I mean, I don't want to scare anybody because all of this is scary enough, but I do think it takes a certain amount of hubris to feel like, our little piece of it, while having such a dramatic impact, can't be checked by all the other things that are dramatic and happening every day.
Well, so let me ask you, Tamara, because it's interesting with 350.org, you've been very, science oriented, obviously, led by, Bill McKibben. And I've been, as a filmmaker, supporting a lot of the, environmental, PSAs and documentaries that I make. But I think I have to be honest and look back and say that the messaging has not worked. Because if you put the science on the table, it doesn't seem to create the behavioral change we need. The things I try to work on is I try to appeal to the heart, because it seems like the facts don't work. So I'm curious, as you're heading up, 350.org, is there going to be a shift in strategy and messaging? Because I think the divide we talked about earlier, the people who voted for Biden or Trump, is all about the fact that we're living in the universe now where we only hear, our own messaging, and the messaging is the weapon. It's the battle. It's the battlefield. It's a battlefield for consciousness, which goes back to spirituality in an interesting way. Because if I have your attention, I basically have your consciousness in the palm of my hand. So we can be vulgar, and fearful, or we can try to engage you, which I think is really great, that nature is beautiful. There's like a certain agenda there that, I feel that with nature, it's a tool for survival because you protect what you love. You love it. And nobody taught you to love a forest. Nobody taught you to love a flower or the ocean, whatever element that really turns you on. So how do we shift behavior given we're living in a sci-fi brainwash bubble that's all about, how could I grab your eyeball?
Octavia Butler wrote the manual on that. But I think what I can tell you about the organization. So May Boothby, our executive director, was one of the founders with Bill, and she is the executive director of the organization. The first 10 years were about just sounding an alarm, making sure people understood that this is happening. The science has proven it. It is not just a feeling. We've known since the 1800s that these forces were moving. We've known since the folks who caused these problems started to do their own hard homework on what their consequences were going to be and started covering that up with as much information as they possibly could, sowing disinformation. Fossil fuel capitalists and the corporate enablers that support them in and outside the government have really made a real business, like the business of selling you stuff you don't need to cover up for their greed and their extractive behavior from the second they drill into the oil to this for oil to the second they deliver it to someone else, and all the things that have the chain of harm that happens in between. So the first 10 years was just letting people know this is happening, moving through the disinformation, making sure people understood that there are parts of this that we can have control over. We can interrupt and create an intervention. So the next 10 years has to be about solutions. It has to be about what's the big vision? What do we fight for that gives us more than what we currently have? We're locked into a system where there isn't a single part of your body, if you live in most places, where you aren't not only covered in, surrounded by, inserting, eating, and using plastics, which is, big oil's side hustle. We are so tied into that system of petro domination that it would be very difficult for people to consciously separate themselves from it. So nature is stepping in to say you've overstepped. The next 10 years has to be about what are we going to build instead that's sustainable. And so for us, that is looking at the money, because it's so dominated the conversation that people cannot be confronted with real information because they're owned by people who told them not to take that in. So it means we have to become much more focused on what we're asking for. The Green New Deal, which is you either love it or you love to hate it. I feel like it's a really great boogeyman because we've been paying for jobs, infrastructure, and human health ever since we built government. So if you call it the Green New Deal, you're not asking, we're still going to pay for roads. People are still going to get sick. And if we haven't given them space, we will be paying to bury them and as they get sick. And we have to pay for the jobs that people do in between. So we can decide that those jobs are ones that feed a circular economy. We can decide that the infrastructure is one that isn't as extractive as what we've been doing and doesn't send people down a road to poor health and poor states of mind on the way to doing that. Like, we can make choices all the way through those decision making processes. So it's scary, and as much of an interesting talking point as that is, the big vision for that is a global Green New Deal. One where we stop pretending that there are good guys and bad guys and start talking about impact and the change we want to see and how many more people we can bring into the conversation. Because even this locked political battle that we're in is really about whether people feel safe. People like as a Brooklynite, I can tell you, Donald Trump's from Queens, man. I got lots of beefs with him. Like, even before he did all this foolishness that he's doing, he's from another borough. I got a lot to say about what that means to me. So, so the fact that this dude from Queens is just gonna come to power and really pretend to tap into the harm that people are feeling, it says much more about our failure to connect with people in community than whether or not he shows up as warm or caring or interesting. The only thing he ever did to make people follow him is acknowledge them. And that's our loss. That's our mistake. So I do think the next 10 years has to be about recognizing that there is no magic algorithm. We just have to start treating people like they're human, like what they need might be in the space that we're in, and offering them an opportunity. Because people go for hate, not as a first or a primary driver, but as a way to get through, to muddle through if they don't have love. So just to put that out there, if we don't create a loving, expansive vision of what the future looks like, where there's some joy for everyone, people are happy enough to be locked into drama because it feels a lot like love, right? So
Yeah.
so we can either stay in this abusive relationship and die on a fiery gas ball, or we could get healthy to have a better relationship with each other and with nature, and then see what we can build together after that. For me, the second thing sounds way more interesting.
Yeah. I feel like a lot of people, especially in the United States, are so lost in the comforts that our country provides, in that dependent consumerism. Like, people don't want to take that step out into a little bit of uncomfortability, to try and create something new, because there are places where people have set up a lot of systems, or enough of these systems, that are creating these more regenerative micro industries, or working towards decentralized or circular economic systems, that it'd be easier for somebody that's still participating in these centralized systems of dependence that we have now. It'd be easier for somebody to step out of that. But for most of the places in our country, and I can't speak for other countries because I've only ever visited, I've not spent enough time in these other countries to speak on that behalf. But there's, I mean, like, where I'm at right now, there wasn't really any platform for me to step out. With the cultural brainwashing that kind of Louie was talking about, that kind of bubble of cultural programming, there wasn't anything that led me to sustainable lifestyle choices or anything like that. That was something that the counterculture led me to, without there really being a platform. Like, I took my permaculture class and everything like that, and there wasn't really any economic structure or community generally around me that was there to be a platform for me to even start working and creating a lifestyle with those kind of principles in mind.
Yeah. But William, but aren't you doing that now? I mean, aren't you a practitioner of social permaculture? And maybe even explain for the audience, what is permaculture, right? And how can that help an entire community?
Right on. Well, permaculture is a design science. It's an ecological design science that utilizes biomimicry, or mimicking natural patterns, to create sustainable systems, systems that have and that are just inherently more sustainable than systems that are created without utilizing that biomimicry, because that biomimicry ensures that level of tried and tested evolutionary knowledge from natural systems. So we utilize that, and a lot of people think it's mostly focused around agriculture, which a lot of permaculture designers do focus on agriculture. But we can utilize natural systems to design better social systems as well. Um, and one of the first social type permaculture systems that I worked on was called non-traditional independent education systems, which focused on kids that the school system might not have been for them. Like myself, I dropped out of high school, and I know there's a lot of other kids like that. So I created a system that could help an individual find what they want to learn about and ways to learn about that outside of traditional academia, outside of high school, college, and all of that kind of stuff. So now I've been focusing more on kind of grasping that attention, as you're speaking of before, through social media and all of that kind of stuff, which has been turning out to be fairly successful. Kind of speaking in that cultural language, that very currently changing cultural language, and kind of grasping individuals' attention, presenting them with something, but also slipping in that message of the work that we're doing, and that's been working out really well.
And William, I know because like I filmed you, like in Baltimore, where you were bringing like the idea of growing mushrooms, not only maybe for food, but to generate income for people living in the inner city, on the vacant lot. Can you just share a little bit about like what that effort is and the feedback on that?
Yeah, well, that the spot that you filmed me at in Baltimore is no longer there. They're no longer operational, which is unfortunate. But I did teach in a lot of different cities, to kind of I think that's where it's mostly needed. I've been doing all of the different agricultural conferences and different events out in the country for years, and it's not super accessible for people that live in the cities. And I find it to be semi-exclusive, in the sense that it's appealing mostly to people that are already interested in it, that might not necessarily be the ones that benefit most from it. And like I'm not a huge proponent of like going into some city that I've never been into before, saying I know these techniques and I have the answers on how to make life better here, because I don't know what life is even like there. I have some ideas based off of what I do know and what I've seen as I've moved around. But I do think it's really interesting to go into these areas, being a young, diverse individual, and show these different tools that I have for developing more sustainable systems that have provided me with income and have provided a lot of the people that I've taught with income. And not only that, that's like the first hook. Um, but the real goodness is when people are able to just do it for the ecological regeneration, or the social revitalization, or eco-
Mhm.
economic revitalization.
Tomorrow, I'm curious, like with permaculture, do you relate to that as a model at all, in a sense, in the work that you do?
So I came to this work through a couple different angles. So my mom was a water protector for 39 years in an urban environment. And then and moving like from her example, and my father was really deeply embedded in community as a part of his work. Um, it has been really important to think through the design elements of what we live in, how people experience it, whether or not we are in the same conversation around how resources are distributed throughout cultural cues, community, and design. And so, in thinking through the experiences that I have had, I came to this work from those roots into an urban environmentalist setting. My first work was environmental law, moved through to public health, landed me in Baltimore doing really amazing work connecting communities that were harmed to folks in the medical community who could assign a series of context clues. So if communities are sick because they're being poisoned, it's important to say that. But because the doors to government are really closed, if you don't have data or storytelling, which is the oldest form of data that we have as audio communicators, if you don't have data and storytelling and in that story have a bad guy that the government is not in relationship with, it's difficult to do work. So really connecting with people who are working the land as it is, who are trying to solve for toxins that they did not put there, they were not told or going to be there, in communities they were cited, pushed, and shoved into by folks who didn't tell them that they would be out exposed to more poison across their the course of their lives than they would ever be able to understand, communicate, or even identify without the help of folks like William, or like medical practitioners, or folks in the community or citizen science sectors of the work. So yeah, it does feel like conversations around design are vital for the future of communities, because no matter where you are, you've been designed into that place unless you wake up on the forest floor, right? So for most people, waking up in the life that you have feels like a set of choices people have made, but it's really about a set of choices that the whole society has made for you, and whether or not you can identify food in your own community, make relationships with other people, come in contact with other folks. Those are all decisions that have been made about how you live, what those materials are made of, and how close you are to other people. So I do think that there are tons of lessons to be learned about how our humanity fits into the larger conversation. And it all starts with revisiting design, whether you are in an urban context or a rural context. In Baltimore, where I live, we experience a lot of both. I live in a zip code that's next to the one where people live 30 years longer than anywhere else in the same city. Like, that's not about anything other than design. Like, you can't, the quality of people's lives, the amount of whether or not they achieve health, that's a set of decisions made by people who make planning and city decisions, transportation and zoning decisions, who decide whether or not you have access to energy or you have the ability to grow it yourself. A really good colleague of mine, Crystal Handley, opened up We Solar, which is a Baltimore solar farm for community solar. Like, we've had this technology since the 70s. It's insane that we're 30, 40 years into communities who were designed into places where they don't have agency about how they operate, to be able to have access to create power from the sun and not be owing somebody every day just to turn their lights on and decide between that and whether they're going to pay for food. So I do think that, like, the kind of knowledge that William is talking about, is holding and brings into community, is really deeply powerful, because people are trained not to see this. They're trained not to know these things. And if that knowledge and information is kept in cloistered spaces with people who are able to dispense it and not, unleashed into the larger ecosystem, people just walk around and whatever's handed to them, and then they're blamed for the outcomes.
Yeah. Again, I think you've woven the fabric that the social justice, environmental justice are really one and the same, right? Yeah. You really can't have one without the other. I mean, whatever values you have regarding the environment and social justice, it's an oxymoron to say I'm an environmentalist, but I'm a racist.
Yeah.
I mean, it can't happen.
I have this conversation more often than I would like to. But I can tell you, driving through the state of Maryland when I first came here in 2015, one of the things I did was go to every single county. I used to have a job where I had to go to every single. So I went all the way deep into Howard County and Garrett County on the other end of Maryland. And I would watch people. I watched the wheels turn in their mind. And they're like, I want to be helped, but do I want to be helped by you? So I would show up and I felt like a Ghostbuster. They're like, my community is being poisoned. And my friends, I believe you. Tell me what you're experiencing. And I would watch, like, if I'm talking to two people, one of them would go, she said she believes me. Let me take her to this lake. Let me show her this thing that's happening to my community. And the other person's like, but I was told by someone I'm not supposed to trust you. And I watch them legitimately taking, like, going through the steps of like, she believes me, I don't know, and ultimately end up working with the person who's like, yeah, I don't care, she says she believes me, that's more than I got yesterday. And we, so then we work on trying to figure out what medical people can help us to prove that the harm you're experiencing isn't your genetics, like isn't some stuff that's been visited on you by choices you made. And how do we connect you with a politician who's not so bought out by people who pay you to be silent that they're willing to help confront the government that takes your money to help you get fixed.
Okay, what do you? I mean, that's just incredible. Because I think really the path forward is, building bridges, and it seems like the work you were doing, being able to say, do you want to be healthy? Do you want to have a good future for your children? Those are all things I think we share in common, and certainly would be a good starting point to have the conversation, because it is so easy to just say, or to create blame and guilt and go, look, here are the facts, here's the data, the air is getting polluted, the lake is polluted, where you go fishing is polluted. It's easier to say, hey, if you want to go fishing with your kids when they grow up, here's a reason why we want to, maintain this environment. Well, you can maintain your lifestyle. You can honor their culture and their way of life. I think that's a way to have the conversation, right?
Yeah, appealing to people's humanity and the community they came from. It works every time.
Yeah. Okay. So what changes do we hope to see as we go through this transformational moment?
We hope to see less suffering. We hope to see more people that have food in their belly at the end of the day. Better education for individuals. More focus on education. More funding towards education. Because I think it's just absurd that we're still teaching in the ways that we do when we have such an understanding that everybody learns differently, and we need to be better equipped to educate a country that's going to take us to different levels of understanding and different levels of humanity, really. So I think putting more focus into education, better food options, more food justice, out here. I mean, I've worked with so many different farms. I've worked on so many different farms, seen people producing so much quality food. This fall, on multiple occasions, I found a single mushroom that could feed multiple families. So when there's food out there like that, I just think it's absurd that anybody's still going hungry. So yeah, I just think more good food on people's plates, more education. People got to know what to do with the food that they're getting. When they're getting real good food, it's almost alien compared to the food that we've been served as we grew up here. More connection and more reverence for nature, because as more people care about it, more people will act to protect it. So that's what I see. And then I think with those kinds of things in place, I think that the potentials are limitless for what humans will start to create for themselves whenever their desires are shifted.
Tamara, your big hopes?
That the present that is currently female will be a future where we don't care so much about gender. I'd be super pumped to see us practice more collective market-based solutions that are not about outside markets, but about the market we're already in, about moving resources to where they need to go. I'm excited for us to stop doing things that hurt us and funding it. I'm excited for us to start making investments in what the future is going to look like. So stopping the harm and starting more care and repair. The biggest part of my work at 350 for the last year and 8 months has been focused on the idea that we need to demand climate reparations, because there are greedy, filthy companies that make their money killing us. And you know what we need to do? Seize their assets and give that back to people who have plenty of ideas about what it would be like to survive if they didn't have to worry about being polluted and having their lives cut short, and whether they're going to achieve health. There are real damages that have been caused to people who have been left to fend for themselves in the big community. And I think it's time for us to start with care and repair. In this moment, this political moment that we're in, that's a good place to go because we've all experienced so much trauma in the course of just getting to the moment where we could have an election. People have experienced group trauma from people fighting over resources in the public. I think we need to start with care and repair. We need to ask people what that means. We need to focus on removing some of the harm, agreeing not to do that anymore, and ask people what it is they would require for us to move forward. So I'm looking for more collaboration. I'm looking for regeneration and for care and repair in every way that we can get it.
Amen. So for either of you, let me ask you a question. Like, what moments in your life made you feel wonder and awe? And can it be a tool for galvanizing a movement?
Do you want to go on that one?
Yeah, I'll start and say that in my life I've been very fortunate to move every 3 years for somewhere like 21 years doing environmental work. So I experienced North Dakota, South Dakota, Wyoming, and DC, and London, and New York, and the U.S. Virgin Islands. And the thing that I know for sure is that there are beautiful people everywhere, making things out of making life out of things that you cannot identify. Really falling in love with how people relate to the land that they are in, paying attention to the ways that they have made, and not projecting your own view of what success looks like under those folks is the only thing that ties up all of the things that we have built out of what we have. So I can go to Montana and see what big sky really means. Or I could go to Yellowstone and watch an animal I cannot identify eat another animal that I cannot identify. And there's so much beauty in just all of that, all of what's being transacted there, and then go back home to the city I live in or the city that I'm from and see incredible beauty of an entirely different kind. So I think if we spent more time knitting together what we are inspired by rather than what we are afraid of, we'd get a lot further.
Yep. Yeah, it's easy to fall for fear. It takes a little bit of effort to embrace, beauty and love, because we're hardwired, from the primal part of our brain just to react to fear. But that was really beautiful. William?
Geez, can you repeat the question? I got lost.
Yeah. No, I mean, what moments in your life made you feel wonder and awe? And can it be a tool for galvanizing, a movement or the work that you do?
What moment in my life?
Moments, plural.
Geez, I mean, I think the moment my kid was born was probably one of the most empowering and like just multi-dimensional, like myriad of emotions type of experience that inspired me with wonder and awe and like really changed everything for me. And as far as like that being something that could be galvanized for a movement, I don't think that that's the route that everybody's going to take. I don't think that everybody's going to have kids, I don't think everybody needs to have kids. But that for me was something that really galvanized everything I do, because I mean, as soon as my son was born, I knew that I had to kick it into high gear. I knew that I had to be able to provide for him and help to create a world that I could just feel comfortable about him living in. So for me, that was one of the most powerful ones. And then,
well, that's pretty big. It's pretty big for me as well.
I can support that and say that in 2019, my first assignment at 350 was being involved in the U.S. climate strikes. So my job was to make that work multiracial and multi-generational. We got 7.6 million people to get out in the streets across the world at the same time. What was exciting about that is the kids. There are children who ran those protests. The folk, they said, look at me. I have the right to have a future and decide what that's going to mean. and in so many languages across so many places. There were 185 countries of people who responded to those kids saying, yeah, you do deserve the right to determine what your future looks like. There's only 2 countries where there wasn't a protest, but I feel like those folks got to be slightly embarrassed. But for everybody else that got out there, the kids didn't have big, deep, complicated demands. They just said, we want a chance. Give us the opportunity to live. Stop making decisions that foreclose the options in front of me. And I think it was really beautiful and inspiring to watch them put their bodies on the line, ask other people to help them and be vulnerable, make it cool to care about climate. I met a kid in the middle of a park not far from where I grew up, and he was like, who's Greta? And the reason he said this was because he was like, I said, what do you mean who's Greta? He's like, everyone had all these signs about somebody named Greta, the horror movie. And I was like, no, Greta Thunberg, she's a climate activist. And he said, oh, so I said, why did you come? He's like, my friend said this is where everybody was going to be. And I was like, so wait a minute, you came because this is cool? We've won. Like it was a really great moment to feel like, wow, this guy stumbled into a moment because his friends said that you got to get out here and save the planet. And I thought, you could, when I was your age, I would have been at the mall, caught up in foolishness. You out here trying to save the planet because it's cool to do that. And I think that is inspiring, like that kind of energy, the decision that they all made, that they could sit in a school building learning about things that they won't be able to achieve if they don't get their butts out in the street. And over again, every time I felt sad or tired or disillusioned, there's been another one of them who just said, give me a chance. Will you help me to get a chance? And It's just been really inspiring over and over again. No matter where I've seen it and no matter how many times I see it, they give me hope. And they're not afraid to call BS on everything that just isn't for them. There are so many tropes that we bought into because of design around who has the right to stuff. And they're just like, that's garbage. Like they're very quick to call some trash and move on. So I am constantly inspired by the folks who were just born and are figuring it out faster than the rest of us.
That was the march the year before the Paris Accords, correct?
Yeah. So 2019's climate strike was it was a feast for your eyes. And I think even this last week of people protesting for the right to live in a country where climate is a conversation we can have. There are 2 kinds of images. There are people who are really sad and angry about losing stuff. And there are people out in the streets fighting for life. And like, if you look at the faces of the people fighting for life and the colors that they draped themselves in and the dancing they were doing in the streets, like they were pushing like the whole energy of the universe towards like a beauty and joy and life. And I feel like you can't really argue. Like there would be the same way that young man was pulled into the crowd because his friend said that that's where you should go. It's irresistible. If you make your movement irresistible, people will do it.
Yeah.
And life's pretty irresistible.
Well, I was there because we did a short film that opened up the UN, the United Nations General Assembly that convened on climate change. And we made a short film to get these world leaders to wake up. It was right before President Obama spoke and Leo DiCaprio spoke. And in order to get their attention, we needed the voice of God. So we got Morgan Freeman to do the narration. And, Hans Zimmer did the music. And but I remember, going to Central Park at the head of the march. And I wasn't even intending to film that day, but I had my camera with me. And I stood at the head of the march and I let that march flow through me. Mm-hmm. I just held my ground and the whole thing went through me. And I saw young and old and like you're describing, all these young kids, college kids, banners for like, people that are, Catholic and Jewish and Christian and Hindu. And it was so beautiful to see this multi-generational, multiracial expression of who we are. So I just wanted to thank you because I know that you were key in making that work, and it was a giant success. Yeah. I mean, the aerial shots of it, looking down, it was like, block after block after block after block of just people. And now we take that for granted. I mean, shit, we can't do that anymore, Yeah,
we can't even be in the proximity with each other. These times will make us creative in different ways. And like nature, we will find ways to adapt. I mean, I've been to some pretty awesome digital rallies that'll make you forget you're in your living room.
Yeah.
And the kids are doing that too. I'm like, wait a minute, I can sit in this box and feel like I'm with people. You know, like they figured out, you know, they could do 24 hours of people talking about why they care about the planet, what they love, like what they're fighting for, and their earnest like demands to be treated like human beings are what's smashing all of it. And there's 4 generations of activists in this fight. There's people who like started in the 60s. They were the yippies who just wanted to solve some specific problems and ended up with the job going, yeah, go ahead, kid. That's what I was talking about. Let me see what I can do to help you out. And so there's real beauty in watching folks who've been at it for a while, like that energy and wisdom exchange.
Yeah.
Of folks who are like, I can tell you how this could end if you give up your principles, and they whisper that into the ear of someone who's full of guts and glory. And between the two of them, we skip a lot of mistakes. So I think we need, like, I have been blessed to see, I call them seasoned activists, like someone's grandma who will rip off their shirt and get arrested in a heartbeat. They're like, I already lived. It's time for these kids to live. You know, like they're the people who knock down your door and demand to get in front of the protest to protect the other people that are there. And I think that is also happening at this moment. So the keywords are, you hit them on the nail on the head, is that if it's not multiracial and it's not multi-generational, we're missing out, because it gets better from here.
Yeah. And that is the lesson of nature, this idea of a giant interconnection, again, not based on greed, for ecosystems to flourish, for everyone to benefit. Nature's operating instructions also happens to be a beautiful model for social and political change. It's right there, literally under our feet, right? Well, this has been a great conversation. I think we're close to the hour. And what I'd like to do is thank both you guys. This has been so inspiring. I think it's a healthy conversation that people will connect with, because the idea that these issues, permaculture, social justice, environmental, consciousness, climate change, are all interconnected. And what you do for one enables the other. And it has to be a holistic approach. And this is a great time for a reboot, an amazing time, because going back to normal was not what we want. Too many people starving, too many people suffering. What a great opportunity to hit pause and envision and reimagine a brighter future. And so thank you guys both for being the changers. I love you guys for that.
It's a pleasure.
Yeah.
Sure.
And thank you. So, and also want to again thank our sponsors that help, cover the cost of all the great people that make this happen. The Weistrich Foundation, I'm proud that, for their support for change makers around the world. It gives us a voice for those that are not heard to be heard. And also the, Fetzer, explore this new study. What does spiritually mean to us? When I say us, it means the United States. They did incredible research and data, asking people who are conservative and liberal and everything in between what spirituality means to them. And surprisingly, they discovered that it indirectly meant political, because it meant, being part of a community, being part of a church. And that translates into political activity as well. So it was, I think, a shock for a lot of people when asked a question about spirituality, that they ended up in a place that was a conversation about community and politics. Also wanted to thank the incredible team that helps us put this podcast together. The folks from Moving Art, Leland, Andy, Courtney, Sarah, and from Magical Threads, Bethany, Ron, Jason, and Bob, and Sean. This has been really fantastic. Stay tuned for more enlightening conversations. You can find it on YouTube and Facebook and Spotify and iTunes, all the cool places that you want to hang out. So thank you, everybody, and we'll see you soon. Thank you.